And it's still rough, but it's mine. Olivia slowly opened a demo right there on the old laptop. The interface was astonishingly sleek and modern, integrating messaging, video calls, and encrypted data transfer, all in just a few intuitive clicks. It's not finished, but all the features are working reliably, she explained, her eyes quietly glowing with pride. Strangely, Olivia's product bore an uncanny resemblance to a project Michael's R&D team had been stuck on for months. This is impressive, Michael Hunter muttered, his voice dropping, equal parts surprised and skeptical. Impressive, really? So why haven't you shown it to anyone? Then he sneered. If you're so smart, why don't you translate this contract and see how you do? The Billionaire CEO mocked the Waitress-turned-developer, but minutes later he was left speechless. What happens when the smartest person in the room isn't the one wearing a suit, but the one society has always underestimated? Stay tuned, because this isn't just a business story. This is the journey of breaking down barriers, the ascension of unexpected talent, and sometimes the very people underestimated are the ones who change everything. Michael Hunter, a powerful 42-year-old CEO, stood looking out over the sprawling city from the top floor of Hunter Tech, the symbol of one of America's mightiest tech empires. His cold blue eyes stared down at the city lights, but his mind was consumed by a raging storm. Just a few feet away, on his polished oak desk, lay a 200-page contract, its dense legal jargon forming an inescapable labyrinth. Michael had built Hunter Tech from a baby startup into a multi-billion-dollar behemoth, but now he felt ensnared by his own success. The $2 billion merger with Synergy Tech, this industry's biggest rival, had once promised to be the crowning victory of his career. Instead, it had become his obsession. Even the sharpest Ivy League legal minds had thrown up their hands at the contract's absurd complexity. With each passing day, Michael felt the pressure choking him. He strode back to his desk, eyes skimming over arcane terms. Indemnification protocols, escrow clauses, fiduciary conditions. Each phrase danced before his eyes, igniting the simmering rage inside. Clenching his fists, Michael felt the helplessness and disappointment gnawing at his famed composure. He had always prided himself on never failing, never being beaten by any obstacle. Yet this time, it seemed his greatest adversary was the massive contract sprawled out in front of him. The phone rang, shattering the tense silence of the room. "Mr. Hunter," his assistant's cautious voice crackled through the speaker. "Perhaps you need a break. The driver's waiting downstairs. Would you like to step out and clear your head?" Michael hesitated for a few seconds, then exhaled wearily. Maybe she was right. He needed some fresh air to think clearly. He grabbed his coat and left the office, though his mind remained haunted. Had he the strength to overcome the biggest challenge of his career? Michael Hunter stepped out of the car into the city's late-night chill, his mind still burdened with numbers and convoluted clauses. The pale street lamp cast his shadow onto the curb beneath an aging neon sign, Rosie's Diner, since 1954. The driver pulled the door closed with a polite click, and Michael nodded slightly before hurrying inside, desperate to escape his own stifling thoughts, if only for a moment. The moment the glass door swung shut behind him, another world opened up. The sharp aroma of strong coffee mingled with the familiar scent of frying grease from comfort food plates. A soft Motown tune wafted from the jukebox in the corner, punctuated occasionally by the clink of spoons against mugs and snippets of idle chatter from regulars. A trucker, a night shift nurse, and an elderly couple with silver hair huddled by the window. Michael froze for a second, his hand still gripping the edge of his tailored vest. His polished leather shoes felt absurd against the scuffed linoleum floor. His bespoke Armani suit, once the symbol of his authority in glass-walled boardrooms, only made him stand out, more out of place than ever, in Rosie's. No one paid him any mind, or if they did, it was only a quick, indifferent glance from patrons already accustomed to strangers like him drifting through late at night and disappearing just as fast. He made his way to a booth tucked into the far corner, away from the counter, and eased himself onto the worn leather seat. He set his briefcase on the table, withdrew the thick contract and his silver fountain pen, tools inseparable from his power. But here, in Rosie's down-to-earth setting, they suddenly felt ridiculous, like a king showing up in a fish market at dawn. The harder he tried to focus, the more irritated he became. The customers' laughter, the hiss of the old radio, and the warm amber lighting all seemed to mock his anxiety. Each time he looked up, he saw the effortless ease and optimism of people who lived far from the cutthroat, calculating world he knew. That contrast quietly challenged his pride and swagger. He'd grown up poor himself, but ever since he climbed to the top of the corporate ladder, he had learned to avoid places like Rosie's, places that reminded him of times when he felt powerless, weak, and unable to control his own future. And now, in this very diner, that old helplessness washed over him again, making him even more frustrated with himself. Furrowing his brow, he buried his head back in the contract, his mind racing about deadlines and the cunning clauses Synergy Tech, his rival, had inserted. Synergy Tech, led by the young driven CEO Charles Miller, never missed a chance to twist terms, exploit loopholes, and set traps in big deals. Michael knew full well that a single slip-up could shatter his entire career. What Charles Miller wanted was more than just a fair contract. He wanted power, a knockout blow that would force Hunter Tech to capitulate. As Michael struggled to reread the tiny, dense print while sipping bitterness from his coffee, he had no idea that tonight, right here in this small diner he'd always dismissed, his fate, and Synergy Tech's, was about to take a dramatic turn, triggered by a server he'd never noticed before. Here at Rosie's, in this deceptively harmless atmosphere, a fateful encounter was waiting for Michael, one that would push boundaries, prejudices, and arrogance to their limits. Just as Michael was still wrestling with the tangled lines of text and that sinking feeling of being out of place in Rosie's unfamiliar atmosphere, a figure appeared behind the counter, moving with a calmness rarely seen in a humble diner. It was Olivia Bennett, a 28-year-old black waitress whom everyone at Rosie's knew by the nickname Quick-Witted Olivia. Olivia wasn't the type to be loud, nor did she try to impress anyone with a flashy appearance. She was tall, with a sturdy build, her hair neatly braided into a bun at the nape of her neck, and her dark brown eyes constantly gleamed with sharp intelligence, as if quietly analyzing everything around her. Her hands were swift and precise, carrying plates of hot sandwiches and pouring coffee for customers without ever spilling a drop. But what people never forgot about Olivia was her confident, composed smile, no matter the situation. 3 years on the job at Rosie's had honed a special kind of resilience in Olivia. Not only was she adept at all the serving duties, but she also had an uncanny ability to read the moods and habits of every regular. With just a quick glance, she could tell who was happy, who was sad, who needed an encouraging nod, or who simply wanted a quiet corner. And tonight, she quickly noticed how different the new customer was. The man in the expensive suit, with a cold stare and attention etched on his face. Olivia wasn't unfamiliar with clients like Michael Hunter. She'd served many business people, lawyers, and even politicians who'd wandered into Rosie's after long, exhausting shifts, carrying the weight of a calculating, high-pressure world into this small diner. She understood that sometimes a kind word or a warm cup of coffee was all someone needed to feel a little more at ease. But Michael was unlike most guests. The way he frowned, sighed, and used his pen to make forceful marks on that hefty contract, and above all, the uneasy frustration woven into his every move, captured Olivia's attention immediately. She recognized anxiety, but she also sensed a cold pride that could only belong to someone who'd had to overcome immense obstacles on their own. As she wiped down a nearby table, Olivia took note of every detail: the gleam of his Swiss watch, his neatly trimmed nails, the tired creases under his eyes, signs of someone who hadn't slept enough for far too long. She noticed how each time the phone rang, Michael shot a strained glance its way before silencing it, as if he wanted to keep the outside world at arm's length. What set Olivia apart wasn't just her intelligence, but her deep listening. Though she'd never spoken with Michael, she'd already read his story through his gestures, his gaze, and the scribbled notes scrawled in the margins of his contract. Synergy advantage. Trap clauses. Escrow fund overreach. Olivia understood that before her sat not merely a strange customer, but someone teetering on the razor's edge between power and defeat. Olivia herself carried many untold stories. Sleepless nights spent teaching herself programming on an old laptop. Years of shelving her college dreams when her mother fell ill, and countless silent battles fought to protect her small family from everyday injustices. That was why she always looked at people with both heart and mind, seeing past the veneer of success, the outward sheen, or even the cold aloofness in people like Michael Hunter. And tonight, in the cozy warmth of Rosie's, as everything seemed to pass quietly, Olivia knew her instincts were right. Something very big was about to happen, starting in that very corner booth, where a CEO was quietly nursing a sense of failure, and a waitress, who the world had long underestimated, was about to step into a conversation that would change both their destinies. From that vantage point, Olivia Bennett, smart, determined, was ready for the surprises and challenges that fate had in store on this fateful night. The moment the glass coffee cup tapped the counter in the hush, Olivia knew it was time to make her move. She carried a glass of water and walked slowly toward the corner booth where Michael was trying to drown himself in the pages of that contract, his face tightening with every passing second. Olivia set the glass down gently, so softly it was almost imperceptible, then offered a small reassuring smile. "Would you like more coffee, or maybe just a moment to take a deep breath?" Michael looked up, exhaustion and irritation written all over his eyes. In that brief instant, he saw a face he didn't recognize. Warm brown skin, calm eyes, hair neatly tied back, and a smile that could soothe the air without ever feeling forced. But instead of saying thank you, Michael merely furrowed his brow, clearly unwilling to be disturbed. Olivia didn't flinch. Her gaze drifted over the thick contract, noting the jagged red ink marks and the pencil scrawls at the margins. Liquidity trap, bilateral risk, hidden clauses. She asked, her tone friendly but measured. "Tough day on the job?" Sometimes just saying things out loud helps ease the mind. Michael cracked a half smile, cold, dismissive, defensive all at once. "Are you a lawyer? Or maybe some anonymous CEO? Here, you just pour coffee and fetch napkins. Thank you." Although his voice wasn't loud, it carried all the way across the small diner, prompting a few nearby patrons to glance over before returning to their own conversations. Olivia remained perfectly composed. She recognized this kind of defensive attitude. She'd heard sharper, nastier comments from customers when she was new. But tonight, her eyes hardened for a brief moment, a glint of steel flashing before she restored her usual gentle smile. "I only meant, if this contract has you so stressed, maybe another point of view, even from a server like me, could help." Michael waved her off dismissively, his smile tight. A $2 billion tech merger is not exactly something everyone can understand, especially not here at Rosie's. I don't think you know the difference between escrow and guarantee, let alone all these legal stipulations. Best to stick to serving tables. I've got this. His tone wasn't just defensive, it dripped with arrogance and prejudice. In Michael's eyes, the world was divided between people like him, strong, powerful, in control, and everyone else who existed merely as background props in someone else's success story. To him, Olivia could never step out of her role as a black server in a small-town diner, certainly not a colleague, let alone someone qualified to advise him. Just an invisible extra in the high-stakes world of big players. But in that instant, Olivia saw something deeper in Michael. The fear of someone who'd once lost everything and then built a cold exterior to keep anyone from touching the insecurities buried within. She didn't answer with anger or wounded pride. Instead, she tilted her head, her voice still soft. Sometimes what you need isn't an expert. You need someone willing to listen and see the problem from a different angle. Michael inhaled slowly, too fatigued to argue. Yet Olivia's quiet resolve held his attention. Under the worn, golden light of Rosie's, these two people, who seemed to belong to entirely different worlds, found themselves caught in an unexpected confrontation, where bias and ego would be tested by intelligence, patience, and unadorned sincerity. And there, in that late-night stillness, Olivia Bennett, the woman he'd underestimated, planted a small seed of doubt in Michael's mind. Maybe the most important answers could come from the most unlikely place, from the very person he had dismissed. The heavy silence stretched after Olivia's words. Michael's eyes flickered with irritation and arrogance. He wasn't used to being challenged by a stranger, let alone a black waitress, on his own turf, a place he'd meant only as a temporary stopover. Leaning back, arms folded, his face ice-cold and laced with sarcasm, Michael said, "If you're so good, then translate it. Put it into plain English." He tossed out the challenge, as if throwing down a gauntlet, sliding the thick contract toward Olivia. His smile was frosty, mocking, as though he already knew the outcome. After all, he'd seen plenty of people, even Ivy League lawyers, sweat and tear their hair out over this pile of paperwork. What could a waitress possibly do beyond carrying trays and wiping tables? For a moment, the whole diner seemed to freeze. A few customers at nearby tables stole furtive glances, not because they were curious about the contract itself, but because of the strange tension swirling between two people from seemingly different worlds. Olivia didn't respond right away. She placed her hands gently on the tabletop and simply observed Michael. In her brown eyes, for an instant, there was a spark Michael couldn't name. Confidence, a hint of wounded pride, and a resolve not to be underestimated again. 3 years of serving had toughened her against all kinds of insults, but Michael's comment, an echo of the invisible barriers she and others like her had always faced, struck at her deepest self-respect. She didn't rush to grab the contract. Instead, Olivia let her gaze drift to the window, where tiny raindrops had begun to snake down the worn glass. That was the moment she chose between ignoring him, just as she had countless times before, or standing up and facing the challenge, despite the prejudice and the judging looks. Finally, she turned back and met Michael's gaze. Her look wasn't submissive, nor was it flattery or pointless defiance. It was simply the calm of someone who had stood up from hard falls more times than she could count. "If you want to hear it in a different way," Olivia said, her voice strange in its quiet steadiness, "then I'll give it a try." She reached out and took the contract, her fingers brushing the stiff paper as she flipped to the first few pages. almost as though she were handling an old, familiar book. The way she scanned each line, even Michael's red-inked margin notes, didn't betray fear or bewilderment. Instead, it revealed the intense focus of someone accustomed to dissecting complex problems in her own way. Michael sat up involuntarily, his expression shifting from scorn to doubt, then to a flash of curiosity. The diner's atmosphere seemed to slow down. The Motown song on the jukebox became a distant backdrop to this unusual test. Olivia pulled a small notepad from her apron pocket and began jotting down key terms from the contract in neat, compact handwriting. Each time she paused, she looked up at Michael, gauging his emotions, measuring his attitude, or simply checking how wary he still was. For the first time, Michael realized he no longer held all the control in this conversation. Instead of contempt, a flicker of confusion crossed his face as he watched the very person he'd dismissed walk confidently into his maze, actively and fearlessly. As Olivia started translating the contract's complicated clauses into everyday language, Rosie's took on a new air, one where invisible barriers began to crack, and Michael, who once believed he controlled everything, didn't expect that this moment would become the turning point for both his career and his own self-awareness. The atmosphere in Rosie's felt strange as Olivia began reading the first pages of the contract, the worn yellow light casting a calm glow on her face. Every time she looked up, she kept her gaze steady, no hint of hesitation, even though across from her sat a powerful CEO accustomed to having life-or-death authority over massive deals. She turned a page, her eyebrows knitting slightly, and then addressed Michael in a natural, unforced tone. "Here, there's a section on indemnification protocols. Simply put, it's how both parties figure out who's responsible if something goes wrong. For example, it's like buying a used car, driving it off the lot, and it breaks down on the way home. This clause decides who pays for repairs, you or the seller." Michael lifted an eyebrow, not giving anything away yet, but his tightly clasped hands relaxed a bit. Those dry legal terms, which he'd read over and over for days, had felt like an impenetrable maze. But now, under Olivia's explanation, they seemed so simple. Everyday, relatable, and no longer threatening. Olivia went on, her tone still measured. "Synergy Tech is pushing Hunter Tech to shoulder most of the risk if their technology glitches after the merger. If I were you, I wouldn't agree to absorb all that downside, especially when the amounts involved are so huge." Michael couldn't hide his surprise. He had assumed a server couldn't possibly grasp the difference between a warranty clause and an exclusion clause, let alone analyze the risks in a multi-billion-dollar deal. Yet every word Olivia offered wasn't forced. She cut straight to the heart of the matter. Most importantly, she'd pinpointed exactly what even Michael's prestigious legal team had argued over for hours, but never clearly communicated to him. Olivia jotted down a note, then pointed to another section. "This is the escrow stipulation, kind of like putting funds into a joint account to secure the deal. If either party breaks the agreement, that money acts as a safety net. But here, Synergy Tech wants you to lock up $500 million. That's way too much. Instead, you could negotiate phased disbursement so you protect cash flow while also increasing your negotiating power." Michael was genuinely stunned. He glanced back at the contract, then at Olivia, an expression of doubt mixed with unease. He realized the truth. This woman wasn't just a good talker. She understood the substance. All this time, Michael believed real power lay with the names on the shareholder list, with his legion of legal and financial advisors. Yet here was an unknown black waitress in a neighborhood diner, methodically peeling back the layers of Synergy Tech's contract traps meant to ensnare him. An odd tension settled around their table. Michael, who was used to controlling every situation, felt for the first time that he'd lost the upper hand. He squinted, searching for a flaw in Olivia's analysis, but the more he listened, the more convinced he became. His initial arrogance gave way to curiosity, which in turn turned into undeniable respect. Olivia didn't stop at explaining. She also pointed out small loopholes Michael had never noticed, sneaky conditions about penalty-free withdrawal rights, and buried provisions that Synergy Tech embedded to sink Hunter Tech if he made even a tiny mistake. You should add a protective clause. If your company's stock drops below a certain level, Synergy Tech cannot back out unilaterally without suffering a big loss. It's like renting an apartment. You need clear binding terms for both parties. No one can just evict you over a vague reason. Michael felt each layer of his defenses slowly crumble. He looked at Olivia with entirely new eyes, not contempt, but genuine attention tinged with a hint of worry over his own biases. The things he once believed were exclusive to those in suits could also live in the mind of someone the world had long underestimated. When Olivia set her pen down and returned the contract, Michael was speechless. He could only watch her in silence, while a persistent question began to echo in his mind. What did I really know about the people I used to dismiss? And what important truths have I been missing, simply because of my own arrogance? The air around the table stayed taut after Olivia set down her pen and looked up at Michael. His expression was a strange mix of surprise, wariness, and a hint of wounded pride. In all his years in business, Michael Hunter was accustomed to being the one in control of every conversation. But tonight, in the middle of this tiny diner, the balance of power had suddenly shifted toward a woman he never expected. He propped his elbow on the table, his voice low but still edged with a cold sharpness. Where did you learn all this? A waitress, yet you understand a merger contract as well as a professional lawyer? Who taught you, or what is your angle here? In his question lay not only suspicion, but also the unwillingness of a powerful man forced to admit he had just been schooled. Michael's eyes flashed with doubt, as if Olivia were hiding some secret identity or perhaps sent by his rivals to sabotage his most important deal. Olivia met his gaze with rare calm. She didn't look flustered or defensive. She simply offered a slight, resolute smile. People always underestimate black women like me, but we know more than they think, Mr. Hunter. Her words sounded gentle, yet they cut through Michael's web of ingrained biases like a blade. He paused, his hand tightening on the table. For a moment, he wanted to object, to insist that his judgment wasn't based on race or gender. But he also knew the scorn he'd shown Olivia, and the snide remarks he'd made, stemmed not only from deal pressure but from deeply rooted prejudice he'd long forgotten he possessed. Olivia continued in a steady tone, neither bragging nor pleading, but full of dignity. I grew up in a neighborhood where, if you didn't protect yourself, people would walk all over you. I learned that to survive, to earn respect, you have to know more, excel more, and refuse to falter in front of those who think they're superior. Michael fell silent. He remembered his own early days, starting from poverty, also looked down upon, but he'd buried that memory long ago, lost in power and luxury, until he became the very person he once despised. I used to go to college. I dreamed of becoming an engineer, an inventor, Olivia said slowly, her gaze far away as if she were glimpsing those old days. But life isn't that simple. When my mother got very sick, I had to leave school and juggle multiple jobs. I don't have fancy degrees or a prominent family, but I kept learning every day, from old books, from the internet, from the customers at Rosie's. They talk about everything. Finance, contracts, even the mistakes of big corporations. In Olivia's story, there was no bitterness or blame, just a statement of fact about her life. Yet that calm honesty struck Michael hard. He realized he had let prejudice and arrogance cloud his judgment, boxing another person into the narrow role society had assigned. He asked softly, for the first time dropping his defensive tone, "Have you ever done anything besides serving here? If circumstances were different, how far do you think you could go?" Olivia shrugged, meeting his eyes. "I don't know, but I do know I won't stop here. And I also know that if you truly want to save this deal, you need to listen more instead of judging." In that moment, Olivia had seized the initiative, and Michael, though he didn't say it aloud, understood that the real confrontation tonight wasn't between him and the contract, but between him and the limitations he imposed on himself. From this point on, everything in Michael's mind began to change, irreversibly. The air around the table between Michael and Olivia, after those tense moments of confrontation, gradually shifted to a different tone. Not just simple challenge anymore, but a mix of curiosity and cautious respect. Michael, who was always in control during conversations, now found himself listening and asking questions, a bit because he was intrigued, and a bit because he felt ashamed of his own prejudice. He looked at Olivia, his gaze noticeably softer. "Did you say you attended college? What did you study, and why did you end up waiting tables here?" Olivia hesitated for a brief instant, her eyes darkening as she gathered her thoughts. Then she replied gently, "I studied computer science at the State University. It was my childhood dream. I love technology and solving tough problems, especially puzzles around encryption and data communication. Back then, I was top of my class in algorithms, and I truly believed I could become a software engineer, or at least a systems developer." She paused, pressing her lips together to hold back emotion. "But then, my mother fell ill. That cruel cancer left her unable to care for herself, and the medical bills kept piling up. My younger brother was still in high school. He couldn't fend for himself yet. I had to choose between finishing college or working full-time to support my family. I didn't really have another choice." Michael went silent. For the first time, he saw Olivia not just as a waitress, but as a real person with real struggles. He thought of his own mother, the years of hardship he'd endured, and suddenly felt a fragile thread of empathy connecting them, despite their very different starting points. Olivia continued, her voice growing steadier. "I juggled multiple jobs, and ultimately chose Rosie's because they paid fairly, and working the night shift gave me daytime hours to care for Mom and tutor my brother. But I never gave up on my dream. Every night after my shift, I'd pull out my old laptop and teach myself programming from online courses and free resources. Over time, I began experimenting with small applications, and before long, I developed a basic communication platform of my own." Michael was genuinely surprised. He leaned in, his eyes brightening. "You built an app yourself? Like, what kind of app?" Olivia pulled her phone from her apron pocket, opened a simple yet tidy interface, and handed it to Michael. "I call it ConnectEase. It's a platform for sending messages, making video calls, and transferring files with end-to-end encryption, all secured, and it runs smoothly even on older devices. The idea was to create something that helped my family and friends stay connected, even if they didn't have the latest smartphones or fast internet." Michael fell silent as he scrolled through the basic features. This wasn't just a product of self-study. It reflected someone who truly understood the needs of everyday users and could solve practical problems, something large development teams sometimes overlook. He looked at Olivia, and in his eyes there was not only astonishment but also regret and self-reproach. regret that he'd almost overlooked genuine talent simply because of her modest server's uniform and because her skin color didn't fit society's narrow definition of success. Olivia spoke again, her voice calm but resolute. I know many people will never believe that a black woman without a prestigious degree could create something truly effective, but I also know that all it takes is one person willing to listen for everything to change. I haven't given up on my dream. I've just never found the chance to step out of the shadows. In that moment, Michael Hunter faced a painful truth for the first time. Out there, special talents existed quietly, hidden only by prejudice, adversity, and the indifference of the powerful world he thought he understood completely. And he realized that if he continued clinging to his old assumptions, he wouldn't just lose a deal, he might miss a true opportunity for transformation for himself as well. The atmosphere at the table between Michael and Olivia, following those tense moments of confrontation, gradually shifted to a different tone. No longer mere challenge, but a blend of curiosity and cautious respect. Michael, who had always driven conversations, now found himself listening and asking questions. Partly because he was intrigued, partly because he felt ashamed of his own prejudices. He looked at Olivia, his gaze noticeably softer. "Olivia," Michael said, using her name for the first time, his voice gentle, almost apologetic. "I owe you both a thank you and an apology for what I thought and said earlier." Olivia simply smiled, her eyes calm but deep. She seemed accustomed to being underestimated, to having to pick herself up after countless moments of being hurt by prejudice. But this time, the way Michael spoke was entirely different, sincere, without any pretense. Michael paused for a beat, then continued, his tone warm and clear. "I can't deny it any longer. This app, the concept, the problem-solving approach, everything is highly practical and full of potential. You've accomplished what many experienced engineering teams at my company are still struggling to find solutions for. I genuinely want to collaborate with you." He inhaled deeply, betraying his excitement, the feeling of having to ask someone outside his usual circles of power for the first time. "Olivia, give me the opportunity to invest and join you in developing ConnectEase. I will provide every resource, financial backing, technical teams, marketing, legal support. You will lead the development. I want to see this app become the next big thing in the market, and I want you to hold a position that reflects your talent." For a moment, Olivia studied him as if to determine whether this was some trap, another arrogant business ploy. But Michael's eyes were different now, honest, devoid of any false pride. He had truly changed, right there in that small diner, because of a woman he had once dismissed as insignificant. Outside, the rain had stopped at some point, and a cool breeze drifted in through the door. But the air inside Rosie's was warmer than ever. Olivia placed her hand on the tabletop, quietly considering. The long years of struggle came rushing back to her, nights spent typing away at code until dawn, shifts that left her exhausted, the judging stares from people like Michael in the past. Could she trust him? Still, she recognized the sincerity in his offer. Not many people have the humility to admit they were wrong, especially in a place where they once thought themselves winners. "If I agree," Olivia said slowly, "I want to retain the project's leadership. I will decide on the development direction, choose the team, and I will continue my shifts at Rosie's until everything is truly ready. I don't want to be sidelined or become a figurehead in my own project." Michael nodded without hesitation. He understood perfectly that true talent only blossoms when respected and given full autonomy. "You will have everything you need and my absolute respect, I promise." For the first time, Two people from entirely different worlds had found common ground, not because of power or money, but because of genuine sincerity, the courage to change, and a determination to rise above every prejudice. That night, Michael left Rosie's with an entirely new outlook, humble yet full of expectation. And for the first time in years, Olivia felt a real glimmer of hope at the end of the tunnel, where her dream was no longer out of reach. Neither of them knew that this inspired decision would change not only their destinies, but also that of an entire technology sector long thought closed off to silent talents. The silence in that small diner hung thickly when Michael's offer landed, leaving a deep unease in Olivia's mind. Even though his gaze had softened and his attitude was far more sincere than before, the scars from years of being underestimated, because of her skin color, because of her job, couldn't fade after just one night. She withdrew her hand from the tabletop and leaned back slightly, as if to claim an invisible safety zone. "You speak well," she said, "but I've heard too many grand promises and generous-sounding offers before, only to end up being a ghost in someone else's power play." Michael was taken aback by her resolve. He was used to nods of agreement and eyes full of hope from people waiting on a miracle from a powerful CEO. But Olivia wasn't the sort to be won over by material gloss. He straightened in his seat and spoke more gently. "I understand. I was wrong the moment I walked in here and let my biases cloud my judgment. I don't expect you to trust me instantly, but I want to earn that trust, starting with genuine respect." Olivia met his gaze, her eyes burning with the determination honed over years of facing prejudice. "If you're truly serious, I have my own conditions. First, I will decide every direction this project takes. Nobody else, not you, not anyone at Hunter Tech. I choose the team, I review every line of code, I decide when and how our product launches." Michael nodded, but Olivia wasn't finished. "Second, I keep working at Rosie's. I'm grateful to this place for giving me a home when every other door closed. I won't leave until the product is truly ready, when I'm certain it's no longer just my dream, but a tool useful to people like me. If you can't agree to that, this conversation ends now." In Olivia's eyes stood not only the pride of someone who'd been hurt, but the strength of a born leader. Someone who always prioritized real-world impact, community, and self-respect over empty promises. For the first time in his life, Michael felt like he was being negotiated with in reverse. He wasn't the one making demands. He was the one being tested on his sincerity and vision. In that moment, he saw Olivia not as a hire, but as an equal partner deserving his full respect. "I agree," he said decisively, without hesitation. "You will have complete authority. And whenever you're ready, I will support you from behind the scenes, without interfering in any product decisions. You deserve to be the master of your own dream." Those few words, though brief, represented a hard-won victory of trust and genuine recognition, not pity or patronizing kindness. As their conversation quieted, Olivia left Rosie's with a light smile. For the first time in many years, she saw a new door opening, not by luck, but because of her own courage. Michael stayed behind in that small space, silently watching her figure fade into the night, knowing that he had just embraced the greatest change of his life, learning to listen, letting go of absolute control, and truly respecting difference. Outside the window, the rain had finally stopped. The city at night was eerily still, signaling a fresh start for both of them. Two people who had just broken down the biggest walls of prejudice in their own hearts. The air around the table had grown tense in the days that followed as Michael and Olivia embarked on a challenging new chapter. Each night after her shift at Rosie's, Olivia spent hours poring over the original contract. studying and double-checking every clause. Michael, in turn, assigned a team of Hunter Tech engineers to support her, keeping his promise to let her have full control and develop the project her way. Yet, when everything seemed to be running smoothly, Olivia spotted one small detail she couldn't ignore. It was a clause hidden in the very last appendix, an innocuous-looking sentence that, if exploited, could destroy the entire deal. One late evening, after everyone else had gone home, Olivia sought out Michael in his Hunter Tech office, clutching the contract and a notebook filled with annotations. "I need you to explain this," she said, setting the contract on his desk. In Appendix D, Clause 4.7, Synergy Tech has the right to back out of the deal without any liability if Hunter Tech's stock falls more than 8% within 30 days of signing. Michael frowned and grabbed the contract to reread that section. What had once seemed harmless now looked like a cleverly laid trap. He squinted at the words, trying to recall the countless tense meetings he'd had with his top lawyers and financial advisors. None of them had ever mentioned this detail. Olivia stayed calm as she explained. "This clause sounds reasonable on the surface, but in practice, Synergy Tech could spread a few rumors or carry out a small market manipulation that would temporarily knock Hunter Tech's stock down. If that happened, they'd have a perfectly legal excuse to pull out of the merger, while any damages or losses would fall entirely on you. All the preparation, the costs, the shareholders' trust, everything could collapse overnight." Michael was stunned into silence for a long moment. He felt a cold squeeze in his chest, not just because of this fatal oversight, but because he realized that the prestigious lawyers he'd placed absolute faith in had missed it entirely. Worse still, he almost became the victim of his own arrogance, unwilling to listen to anyone outside his usual circle of power. Olivia looked him straight in the eyes, her expression both resolute and composed. "You asked me why I'm so good at spotting contract flaws. It's simple. I'm used to having to protect myself and my loved ones from other people's power plays. When you've grown up on the outside, you learn to examine every single line of text to find the truth." Michael nodded, both in awe and with a pang of remorse. The truth was, without Olivia, Hunter Tech could have collapsed in an instant, and everything he'd built his entire life, everyone he'd trusted, would have become a laughingstock in the business world. "Thank you, Olivia," Michael said slowly, his gratitude plain. "If it weren't for you, I would have lost everything because of my own complacency." This shock not only awakened Michael to the hidden dangers posed by his rival, but also dealt a heavy blow to the pride of a man who thought he knew everything. In that moment, he learned something else. Sometimes, the person with the ability to save you from the brink comes from a place you'd never expect. From that point on, Michael's respect for Olivia was more than just words. It became genuine trust. That shift changed the balance of power completely, not only in the contract, but also in the way he viewed and ran his life moving forward. The truth was laid bare, like a bucket of cold water thrown onto Michael Hunter's pride. But while many would have chosen to deny or hastily hide their failure, he sat quietly and listened to Olivia, waiting to see what the woman he had once looked down on would do with the death trap she had just uncovered in the contract. Olivia didn't panic, nor did she leverage the fact that she had just saved an entire corporation to demand credit. Instead, she quickly assembled the engineering and legal teams that Michael had assigned to her and took it upon herself to rewrite the contract's backbone clauses for the merger. She picked up her pen, her voice calm, her eyes shining with a rare resolve from someone society had long labeled as lesser. If we want to protect Hunter Tech, we must reverse control these key conditions. Rather than giving Synergy Tech an unconditional exit, We need objective stock price thresholds and a compensation clause in every scenario where one party unilaterally terminates the agreement. But Olivia's changes went beyond mere fixes. She proactively proposed improvements even the most senior lawyers had never considered. Break the escrow into multiple disbursement phases to both protect cash flow and preserve negotiating leverage. Add independent valuation benchmarks for assets, ensuring full transparency of Synergy Tech's actions post-signing to prevent information manipulation. Crucially, she advised Michael to include a double penalty clause. If Synergy Tech violated terms under a claimed force majeure, but it could be shown they acted with subjective intent, they would owe twice the normal damages. When Olivia presented these proposals at Hunter Tech's board meeting, everyone's eyes turned to her. Astonishment, admiration, and a tinge of shame. A few veteran lawyers initially planned to debate her, but after just a few brief, well-reasoned explanations, mixed with real-life examples and legal citations, they were completely convinced. Michael, in his role as CEO, sat silently and listened, feeling for the first time a genuine sense of pride in having dared to change. He knew that if he had been his old self from a few weeks ago, he probably would have dismissed every suggestion based solely on the speaker's social status. But now, he sat quietly, listening to Olivia, the black waitress he had once underestimated, who was now the very person saving the entire Hunter Tech empire from a catastrophic legal trap. The next negotiation with Synergy Tech unfolded dramatically. The other side was initially surprised and then angered to find that every carefully designed escape route had been sealed up by Olivia's new clauses. Especially when their lead attorney tried to exploit a loophole during the final meeting, Olivia immediately spotted it and countered with a sharp legal citation, forcing the opponent to concede. In the end, the contract was re-signed. Concise, tight, and fair to both parties. Hunter Tech avoided the risk of losing tens of millions of dollars, and the company's reputation soared in the market. When everything was settled, Michael approached Olivia, stripped of the cold authority he once displayed. He extended his hand, looking at her with deep respect. If it weren't for you, Hunter Tech would have collapsed. Thank you not only for your talent, but also for your courage and integrity. I have learned more in the past days from someone I once dismissed as just a waitress. Olivia shook his hand, a smile lighting her face. Not the kind she'd once worn to hide her wounds, but the genuine pride of someone who had just proven her worth in a place where no one bothered to listen. And at that moment, in Michael's heart, his respect for Olivia was no longer fleeting. It became a new guiding principle. Always recognize talent with a fair eye and a humble heart. From then on, the fate of both Hunter Tech and Michael Hunter entered a completely different chapter, one of profound transformation, all sparked by a black waitress who had once been judged to be at the very bottom. After months of relentless work, hundreds of nights spent juggling her evening shifts at Rosie's with coding until dawn, the moment they'd all been waiting for finally arrived. 6 months after that fateful conversation in the little diner, Hunter Tech officially launched the ConnectSphere app at a lavish event in a downtown city hall. That day, Olivia stood on stage, the spotlight illuminating her radiant, confident face. Behind her hung the ConnectSphere logo, a symbol of barrier-free connection and a testament to the power of dreams born from humble beginnings. In the audience's front row sat Michael Hunter, his expression brimming with pride. He was no longer the arrogant man he'd been when he first met Olivia. He understood now that the entire tech industry was watching the woman he had once underestimated. ConnectSphere was not just another communication app. Drawing on her own life experience and profound empathy, Olivia had crafted a platform that outpaced its competitors. an intuitive interface that ran smoothly even on older devices, top-tier security features, and a suite of tools enabling users to connect and share resources for learning, work, and family. Moreover, Olivia dedicated a portion of the app's initial revenue to free coding programs for underprivileged teens and students of color, people just like her who had once been overlooked by society. ConnectSphere's success soared beyond expectations. In its first month alone, the app reached 1 million downloads. Leading tech publications christened Olivia the rising star of American tech. Journalists highlighted her remarkable backstory. A black waitress in a modest diner who, through grit and intelligence, had rewritten the narrative of opportunity, ability, and faith. In low-income neighborhoods, public schools, and community centers across the country, Olivia Bennett's name quickly spread as a beacon of hope. She frequently appeared at speaking events, not as a detached expert, but as a big sister figure, encouraging young people with a simple message. Talent doesn't care about your skin color, your background, or your starting point. Sometimes, as long as you believe in yourself and keep learning, opportunities will come from the most unexpected places. Olivia's journey and ConnectSphere's rise shattered long-held prejudices not just within the tech world, but across American society. Those who once felt powerless, resigned to remain in the background, now dared to dream, to act, and to fight for their own voices and aspirations. For Michael Hunter, ConnectSphere's triumph wasn't merely a lifeline for Hunter Tech. It was a living lesson in humility and in recognizing talent beyond outer appearances, skin tone, or family pedigree. He was no longer the decision-maker who ruled with absolute authority. He had become a genuine partner, learning every day from Olivia's extraordinary creativity and determination. And for Olivia herself, that day marked more than a career milestone. It stood as a declaration of her dignity, pride, and courage, proving that someone once labeled impossible could achieve the extraordinary. From a diner waitress, after countless setbacks, insults, and closed doors, Olivia Bennett showed the world. If you dare to rise above prejudice, anyone can create something truly extraordinary for themselves and for everyone around them. The resounding success of ConnectSphere didn't just elevate Olivia Bennett's position, it fundamentally reshaped the mindset and operations at Hunter Tech. For the first time in years, Michael Hunter took time to reevaluate the entire personnel structure and core values of the empire he had built. Olivia's lessons were no longer merely inspiring anecdotes. They had become the driving force behind his commitment to completely rethink how he identified human potential. Michael called a leadership meeting, not to celebrate victory, but to announce a sweeping reorganization of the company's staffing. Looking each department head and executive in the eye, he spoke with unmistakable seriousness. We've spent too long fixating on glossy resumes from prestigious universities, candidates with perfect backgrounds. But Olivia's story showed me that true talent isn't found in a transcript, an address, or a family name. From now on, Hunter Tech will seek talent everywhere. Community colleges, trade schools, small towns, neighborhoods that society once overlooked. That's where people like Olivia are waiting for a chance to prove themselves. Several directors reacted with hesitation, even outright resistance. They cited every excuse: uneven skill sets, lack of soft skills, fear of hurting our brand image by hiring people who didn't meet the usual elite standards. But this time, Michael refused to accept their conservatism. He pointed to a slide on the screen. Since Olivia officially took the helm of the ConnectSphere project, productivity had increased by 50%, and the level of innovation among the young engineering team significantly outpaced the old Ivy League-only squads. The atmosphere of collaboration, learning, and innovation within the company was more vibrant and energized than ever before. Michael was determined to create a new HR department, one directly advised by Olivia. She became the sponsor for talent incubator initiatives, personally visiting small colleges, hosting workshops in rural areas, and awarding scholarships to students who had been overlooked in traditional hiring processes. Hunter Tech job interviews opened up to hundreds of candidates from widely varied backgrounds. A single mother who had learned electronics through online courses, a young man of color who fixed computers at the local barber shop, a Latina woman who taught herself programming on an old phone. This new policy sparked debate across the tech industry and attracted curious, cautious attention from the press and competitors. But just 1 year later, those unexpected hires had proven their true worth. Internal innovation surged, and practical, groundbreaking tech solutions emerged one after another. Hunter Tech rose to become a leading technology corporation, known not only for its products but also for its pioneering commitment to equal opportunity and innovation. It was honored on prestigious rankings for a corporate culture that was uniquely diverse and inclusive. Michael himself had undergone a complete transformation. He now frequently appeared at inspirational talks, not only discussing business strategy but also emphasizing the greatest lesson of his life. Don't confine talent to familiar molds. If you dare to look beyond a diploma, skin color, or family background, you will discover the brightest, roughest diamonds. Olivia became a mentor and a source of inspiration for the next generation. She was more than just the star behind ConnectSphere. She was the catalyst for a quiet yet powerful revolution that changed how the entire tech industry viewed the true value of people. And it was precisely that diversity and the courage to embrace difference that laid the solid foundation for Hunter Tech's extraordinary growth, leading not only in product innovation, but also becoming a new symbol of equality, creativity, and humanity across America. A year after the revolution at Hunter Tech, Rosie's, the small time-worn diner that had been a haven for so many ordinary lives, was more lively and warm than ever. No longer just a refuge from everyday fatigue, Rosie's had become a familiar gathering place for celebrating the successes of a generation of young people once underestimated and rejected because of their background or skin color. That late afternoon, Michael Hunter and Olivia Bennett sat at the same old table by the window where they had once faced off, doubted one another, and tested each other's resolve. Outside, the streetlights flickered, casting their reflections onto the worn tile floor, an echo of the days when they had occupied opposite sides of life. Michael was dressed casually now, no longer bearing the proud demeanor of a CEO accustomed to issuing orders from a glass-walled office. He slowly lifted his coffee cup, his eyes shining with rare pride and tranquility. "We used to underestimate each other, Olivia. Perhaps we both carried wounds and fears of being forgotten. But I've learned that only by looking at others with our hearts can we truly see their real value." Olivia smiled, a powerful, warm smile, the kind of smile someone wears after facing countless storms, after feeling the pain of rejection, yet still choosing to believe in others and in oneself. And I've learned to forgive, not just you, but also myself, for those moments of weakness when I thought my dreams were nothing but luxuries. Because someone believed in me once, I can now pass that opportunity on to others. Around them, the young colleagues, the rough diamonds that Hunter Tech had nurtured, gathered in small clusters, sharing stories of overcoming self-doubt and prejudice. In one corner of the diner, a group of students of color laughed brightly, animatedly discussing their new software project, where Olivia remained both a role model and a guide, never holding back her encouragement. That night, the atmosphere at Rosie's carried none of the heaviness of failure or bitterness. Instead, it was filled with excitement, passion, and optimism. Photos of Olivia, Michael, and their young teammates were pinned to a small wall as a reminder to every generation. Every great journey begins with something small, with the courage to stand up and to look within. Both Michael and Olivia understood that many challenges lay ahead, but now they were no longer adversaries. Instead, they were teammates, friends, and sometimes each other's greatest teacher. Michael set down his coffee cup, his eyes reflecting a deep meaning. Perhaps Rosie's in our meeting here taught me that true strength doesn't lie in power or money, but in gratitude and fairness toward every person we meet. Olivia replied softly, her gaze steady yet gentle. And I know there is no wall we cannot overcome, as long as we remain persistent and give each other even the smallest chance. Outside, the city at night kept moving, but in the small corner of Rosie's, a silent revolution had spread beyond the confines of a single company or industry, becoming a belief that kindness, intellect, courage, and fair opportunity are the most enduring foundations for changing the world. This is not just the ending of one story, but an endless reminder. Never underestimate a person or a dream, because sometimes it's that seemingly small thing that sparks the greatest revolutions. If you love moving stories about overcoming prejudice and pursuing success, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our next inspirational content. Thank you for watching.